It's time to add the state names in front of the word Derby as we enter the last round of prep races for this year's Kentucky Derby. Let's take a first look at the Louisiana Derby. What's up, everybody? I'm Colin Sheehan. I'm joined again by Matt DeSantis here on Trust the Profits YouTube page. Please like and subscribe. We are back with another preview of another big Kentucky Derby prep race. This time it's the Louisiana Derby, Matt. We are now moving into the 100-point races. It's getting serious.
It is getting serious. This last really 3 weeks of Derby preps. You mentioned it. The state races are coming out. Louisiana Derby, Arkansas Derby, Florida Derby. Then you got the Santa Anita, the Wood Memorial, the Bluegrass. You even got the Sunland Park mixed in there. You got the UAE Derby overseas. I mean, this is going to be a jam-packed next 3 weeks of Kentucky Derby prep racing, and everything we think we know might get upended over this next 3 weeks. There might be a lot of chaos because this is a very evenly matched crop, it feels like, across the board.
You love using that word now. You know I love the chaos, so it's Colin brings the chaos. But Louisiana Derby, and as we said, this is when it gets serious. Look at the past winners. You immediately can look at that list and know you've got some serious contenders that are going to be coming out of this race, as we had Epicenter last year, Hot Rod Charlie, by my standards, Gervin, and of course Gunrunner, who probably could have some impact on this year's race.
Yeah, absolutely. Super impressive list of winners, obviously. And, you know, there's a horse that is not listed up here who was one of my personal favorites who ran in this race, which was Midnight Bourbon as well. So even the horses that might not win this race are still extremely accomplished horses. This is just a really strong circuit. And it's something we talked about a little bit with the other guys, El Hombre and Formula, on our Kentucky Derby conversation roundtable, which was this fairground circuit and the Oaklawn circuit as well just feels like super, super strong this year compared to a lot of the other circuits. And so this Louisiana Derby has come up really salty this year and excited for this field.
So we'll jump right into it as you bring it up. That's what you call a transition in the television world. This week, Saturday, March 25th, we have more than just the Louisiana Derby, of course, but that's the one we're focusing on here on this video. But stay tuned because there's going to be plenty of more content coming out. As Matt likes to go international, maybe I'll go over to Sunland for once, and we can't forget Turfway Park. So this is the jewel of the eye, though, of the races. Yep. And as we talked about when we started hitting the Rebel and the Risen Star, you started to get a lot of the names that you've been seeing racing against each other. And again, we have that kind of the same mix, but we toss in number 2, a little Instant Coffee, who we haven't seen since the Lecomte Inn at the fairgrounds. So you thought this was a salty race. What's your overall impressions first of this field of 12?
Yeah, I really like it. It's a very solid field. I think the morning line kind of reflects that, and that sure, Instant Coffee is probably the understandable favorite, but after that, it's just a lot of, I think, very evenly matched horses. Maybe horses, it's interesting. You have some horses that are big upside horses. A horse like the number 7 horse, Cagliostro, only run 3 times. You also have horses like Curly Jack, who feels like he's run 10 times already in his career. So you have some horses that are just coming in with very different types of resumes. But I just think it really interesting. A horse like Jace's Road, who has been kind of an under-the-radar Brad Cox horse, is there. King's Barnes, this kind of Todd Pletcher horse that everybody seems to want to have in their top 5 Derby horses, is running. Steve Asmussen's horse Disarm is back. You have Sun Thunder, who finished second last time out. You have a lot of really nice horses, and I just feel like this is a really strong race. And a horse like Tappett's Conquest is at 10-1. So I think this is a great betting race from a standpoint of the morning line and even what it probably will end up at post time as well.
And Steve Asmussen and Todd Pletcher are actually tied for the record with 4 Louisiana Derby wins, and they both have a shot here. As you mentioned, the ones that Asmussen's bringing in and the ones that Pletcher's bringing in. Asmussen here, I think, you know, as I said on our preview, a little bit disappointed that he lost a horse like Extra Anejo. He's, I believe, 0 for 23 in the Kentucky Derby, someone that is the North American leading trainer, but doesn't have this is probably the hole in his heart. And I think when you came in with Extra Anejo, he really felt strong with that horse until that horse was taken off the Derby trail. He comes back here with number 1, Sharper's Revenge. He's got, as you mentioned, Disarm. I'm really a big fan of Disarm. I actually forgot about Disarm. You texted us the Disarm was on my list. I really liked that win that he had up at Saratoga in the early August. He came back in a race in Oaklawn where he finished second to Two Eagles River, who's had a pretty solid run starts. Andy's out of Gun Runner, which you can never go wrong there.
Nope.
But I had forgotten about him, and I saw him on the list, and I went, "Ooh, I love this arm!" And getting that 10-1, he would be the one that I'm interested of those ones that you talked about coming back. He's only raced 3 times, but his last 2 speed figures were a 91. You have 4 horses coming back from the Risen Star. That's Sun Thunder, Single Ruler, Tappett's Conquest, and Curly Jack. And then, as you mentioned, you have 5 trying stakes for the first time: King's Barn, Cagliostro, Disarm, Shopper's Revenge, and then number 12 Baseline Beater, 20-1. I don't know. I wouldn't bite at that price. Would you?
No, I'm not going to bite on Baseline Beater, and also the Far Outside Post. In a dirt route race, I'll probably always pass on those types of horses.
But that's something that I use in my handicapping. And now we're getting, these horses, as you mentioned, have had a lot of runs, and they've been running in stakes company. You have to decide, are the horses that have been running in stakes company going to be better than the ones that are stepping up into stakes for the first time, jumping up to a race like Grade 2. We know why they're here. The trainers and the connections are trying to get into that Kentucky Derby. You only need to get first or second in this. I shouldn't say only get first, but a second place finish in this race with 40 points gets you in the Derby gate. So you're going to have to decipher stakes horses that have been on the stake side or horses that are stepping up. And you mentioned that a little bit. Where do you tend to think the winner's going to come from?
So I think I tend to think that you're actually going to see horses that are stepping up, because I think that this has been, for me at least, this has been a very underwhelming crop. We've talked about how there's not been a lot of wow moments produced from this crop. And I just feel like this is a year, and I made this point a few weeks ago on the Win Play show. It feels like a year where it's going to be one of these horses that just kind of like pops up at the right time and just like all of a sudden goes maiden special weight, allowance win, Derby prep. We're going to win the Derby. Like, it just feels like it's going to be a very accelerated timeline. I know a lot of people always talk about that 2-year-old foundation, want to make sure that this horse has a lot of races in them. And it just feels like this year's crop is very vulnerable to something else. And the one thing we also talked about is we have not had a dominant front-running horse on the Derby trail yet. And I just feel like that there's a possibility for that. I'm not going to say who quite yet, but there's a possibility for that to potentially happen. And if you get a horse that can wire a field, that could be a very, very dangerous thing to be able to have on this year's Derby trail, because there's not a lot of pace among most of the Derby contenders right now.
Well, I think you'd agree that there's at least been one wow moment, right?
There's been there's been a couple of moments that I think are impressive, but I wouldn't. There's not been a moment where I go, that's the Derby winner.
You didn't
Just
think
to
that
me,
with Forte?
not even with Forte. It was just so it was so businesslike, and I just didn't really. I didn't love the rest of that field, and also the Florida Derby is shaping up not to be particularly strong because everybody's ducking Forte to some extent, which might tell you everything you need to know about Forte. But it is, but it is interesting. I've just not had those moments yet. But that's me. Maybe I'm hard to impress. I don't know. I used to be a professor. I don't give out A's to everybody. So, but I'm looking for these up and coming horses.
Well, I was leading you down a trail and you wouldn't go down that trail, but that's okay. I'm going to lead you there. I'm going to lead you there anyways, right? Because you talked about this year's crop. There's a horse in here, and I thought you were going to say, yeah, Forte's, had that wow moment. And I'd say, well, number 2, Instant Coffee's only had 1 loss, and that was to Forte.
Yep.
His other 3 races, I would say, have been, we keep counting them out. And I know the morning line didn't, especially in the Lecomte and the Kentucky Jockey Club, but I feel like it wasn't like, oh, Instant Coffee's, my pick in this race easily. Yeah. And he's come through and he's done what he's needed to do, and he's driven clear. He's finished really well. But it sounds like you're not as impressed with Instant Coffee.
So let me be clear. Love Instant Coffee as a horse. Love his running style. Personally, I don't think it's great for the Derby, but he's a grinder, and I love horses that are grinders because they just get there eventually. So he reminds me a little bit of like Country Grammar, like just a grinder that's going to like more distance. This is 1 mile and 3/16, longer than any of these horses have ever gone before. Here's the problem. Instant Coffee is a little pace dependent because he likes to come from the back. And guess what? There's not a lot of in this race, not a lot of pace. And so I just don't know the way this sets up for Instant Coffee. That's my only concern. I don't doubt the horse's quality, his ability. He's going to get the distance. The only other thing I'll say is the one time he's not run well, it It was in a really big field, and he just drops back and gives himself too much to do. And I just worry you get him in another 12 horse field with not a lot of pace. Is he going to be able to get there at the end? I don't know.
And that sets up a little bit of a concern for a horse that I've been very high on, which is a return of Tappett's Conquest, one that I've continued to talk about, who's needed that pace up front. Was forwardly placed in his maiden win at Churchill Downs, but both in the Risen Star and the optional claimer before that, he was coming late, and he was coming really well until he kind of flattened out in the Risen Star. I was left feeling underwhelmed with Tappett's Conquest after the Risen Star, a horse that I was really high on. You guys all know I had kind of continued pumping him up. Where are you feeling about my boy Tappett's Conquest?
I like him a lot. I don't think he's quite as pace dependent as Instant Coffee. I think he can be a little bit more forwardly placed. You mentioned that he's done that before. I think he's got a little bit more versatility. I think, there was some crazy pace in that last race in the Risen Star. So he was, I think, a little further back than maybe he would be otherwise. I think in a race like this, where there's maybe not going to be a lot of pace, I would not be stunned if he is sitting mid-pack, at worst. And so I think there'll be, you also have Manny Franco aboard. Manny's an aggressive jockey. He's going to want to get this horse out there in a good position, keep him out of trouble. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he's sitting, fourth or fifth or something like that, kind of in a second flight. And I think that would be an ideal spot for him in a lot of ways. So, because it wouldn't give him as much work to do. I'm still very high on Tappett's Conquest, like him a lot. I think he's got a lot of ability and should like the added distance as well.
We might as well finish off the Brad Cox tour as we talked about the first two. The third is Jace's Road, a horse that I've kind of just, he's kind of just not done it for me. And in my mind, I've just thrown him out. Will I be making a mistake in tossing him here?
You'll make a mistake if it's a dry, fast track. If it's a sloppy track, please toss him as far as you possibly can, because this horse does not like wet surfaces. But if it's a dry, fast track, it's interesting. You can his running lines are in such a way that you can just easily draw a line through those two bad performances and go, he doesn't like the slop. Okay, fine. And if you look at his other races, you go, it looks pretty good. And if you go off of that, then maybe this horse has got a shot. Here's the other thing. In the Gun Runner, which he won, what did he do? He wired the field. Well, there's not a lot of other pace in this field. Kingsbarns might have a lot of pace, but Kingsbarns actually likes to rate a little bit more. And that's the way Pletcher's been training that horse. So, it's possible that Jace's Road gets out there in the lead. And you also know he's going to be breaking from the far outside 11, or not the far outside, but the 11th post. He's going to want to cross and clear. He's going to want to go and save as much ground as he can. Can you wire the field? Maybe so. I mean, on big days at tracks, a lot of times that track is souped up to really favor early speed, and it can carry a horse home.
And we like to bring up the Brisnet pace style that you see there right in the middle of your screen. And as we mentioned, not a ton of pace signified by your E and your EPs. The highest number is 5, which is actually Curly Jack there near the bottom. But on the right, we have Prime Power. And I always talk about when you see your top 4, 5, 6 horses in a really tight space of numbers. So there's not a big difference between, say, Instant Coffee, and you can go all the way down to really Single Ruler, and that's only an 8-point difference. That tells you that this race is wide open. So as we'll transition into who we're actually going to take in this race, I think that as you mentioned about Instant Coffee, this is probably a good opportunity, knowing that you got Forte in the Florida Derby. This is probably one of your opportunities before we get into get closer to the Derby to find a nice price, which we've gotten, right? We've gotten in the Risen Star, we've gotten in the Rebel, with Confidence Game, Angel of Empire. Is that kind of how you're approaching this race?
A little bit how I'm approaching it too. I just think it's a race where I don't want to use Instant Coffee as a favorite. At 2-1, with the lack of pace and his running style, 2-1 for me, I just can't bet him. And so I'm going to look somewhere else for a little bit of value and a little bit of upside. And so I will just go ahead. And as you put up our fancy little graphic, which I always appreciate, my top pick will be Kingsbarns. So I'm going to go with the Todd Pletcher horse. I'm a sucker. Everybody knows this. I'm a sucker for lightly raced horses with ascending speed figures, and that is exactly what Kingsbarns is. I try to catch these types of horses maybe one race too early rather than one race too late in terms of getting a little bit of a price. I wouldn't be surprised if this horse actually floats up a little bit, but this is a horse with a ton of ability. And he just looks so good at the Tampa Bay Derby. I just remember watching him run the day after the Sam F. Davis and thinking he looked better than everybody that ran in the Sam F. Davis. And he came back with a better speed figure than everybody in the Sam F. Davis. And so I think he's a horse that's going to like all the ground you want to give him. So he's going to be my top pick. And then my top value play, I'm going to go with a little bit of a curveball. I really like Cagliostro, the number 7 horse for Cherie DeVaux. This is a horse that I was just super impressed by actually when he broke his maiden, and it was not a huge speed figure. Really like that horse, and almost got the win last time out at a nice price, I thought, as well. And I just really like the way this horse is progressing. This horse came out of a really strong maiden special weight race in debut at Saratoga, took a really long layoff, came back, broke its maiden off that long layoff. Then second time out, ran a much better speed figure. DeVaux's got good statistics going off Lasix in a stakes race, actually winning at about a 19% clip. So I have confidence in terms of, going off of Lasix from that last effort. So at 12-1, that's where I'll go for some value.
My top pick, the same reasons you gave for Kingsbarn, is very similar. And we always talk about this, about ascending speed figures until they don't ascend anymore. You use Bayer, I use Brisnet, so sometimes when we compare them, they may be a little bit off, but I'm using that same logic and taking another shot with the horse Sun Thunder for your boy Kenny McPeak with Brian Hernandez aboard. I've been high on this horse. He just hasn't, really had that pop, but you're getting nice prices on him. The 5-1's a little low, but my value pick is I'm going to go with a higher price. So I picked Sun Thunder as my horse on top. You talked about not liking the slop for Jace's Road. Well, Sun Thunder's run on a sloppy track and a good track as well. And maybe you could cross the line through those. And when you go back and look at the Risen Star, was closing really, really well. Now,
yes, very well.
Does that mean that he's going to need the pace? I don't necessarily think so. I'm hoping that maybe he's a little bit more forwardly placed than he has been. He's got the 4-hole, so hopefully he can get you can't drop back behind 10, 11, 12 horses. Then he might be in trouble. But the loss was to Arabian Night. He lost to Determinedly, and he lost to Angel of Empire. So nothing really there to be sired by Into Mischief out of a dam of Medaglia d'Oro. So we talked about this is going to be the longest prep race. That's important when you're trying to figure out who's going to be able to hold the distance when you get to the Kentucky Derby. We'll see if Sun Thunder can be the one. I'll give him one more shot. For the value play, I'm going to go one more step outside. Very similar to what we just talked about, increasing speed figures. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. I like Disarm. I forgot about him, and if I forgot about him and then tossed him, I'd be really pissed if he came in and won at a 10-1 price. You get the wild card of Rosario up. Sired by Gunrunner out of a Dam Tappet. I mean, I like the breeding that you see there, average winning distance of over 7 on both the sire and the dam side. As you mentioned, sometimes these horses get overlooked when they're lightly raced, and I'm hoping that the price will float up a little bit, and Disarm will be my value play here in the Louisiana Derby. I will have Instant Coffee in the mix, though. I don't think he's a horse that's going to, like you said, he's a grinder, and I'm not going to take probably my top pick in value play and box those without including someone like Instant Coffee. If you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. He's not going to run a bad race. I'm too confident in that horse. He's not going to run a clunker. He might finish third, but he's not going to run a bad race. And he might just run out of ground at the end, or he might just not get the pace set up that he needs, or he might just have a lot of traffic trouble, but it's not going to be from a lack of effort or a lack of ability. So yeah, I like your Kings Barnes selection quite a bit. I think that's a really good, or I'm sorry, your Disarm pick, I should say, quite a bit. I think that's a really good selection. So this is a great betting race, though. I think you can make a lot of arguments for a lot of different horses here, and it feels like a very wide open race where you can ask 12 different people and you might get 10 different opinions on this one. So this is going to be a lot of fun to see who ends up winning this first 100-point Kentucky Derby prep race.
Yeah, and I'll just add about Instant Coffee. Remember, he's been keeping all of his prep races have been Derby point races. So he's in 9th place with 32 points. And I said this about Forte, saying, well, he's already in. He doesn't need to come and bust down the door. And he did in his last race. But Instant Coffee doesn't need to win. Doesn't really even need to come in second. A third would do it for him. A fourth would do it for him. So seeing how Brad Cox approaches this, it could just be, let's get some reps in before the big one.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out that Instant Coffee I mean, the reason his estimation has gone up in all of our eyes is because all the horses he beat have come back to run super well the next time out. And so he's beating really good horses that are now going on to win other races on the Derby Trail. So there's no reason to expect him to turn in a bad effort. Cox off the layoff is always a super strong percentage. So that's not even a concern. Like, is the horse going to fire? He'll be ready to go. But I'm a little hesitant about the pace. And I just think a horse like King's Barnes is going to be really close to that pace. I think probably just sitting off of Jace's Road is just going to get the right trip, I think, more than anything else.
That'll do it for our preview of the Louisiana Derby. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Matt, where are we going this week for capping the card?
We're going to stick right there at the fairgrounds. Going to be joined by Scott Shapiro from Churchill Downs. And we're going to go through, he's going to join me for the late all stakes pick 5 sequence, but we're going to, I'll cover all 15 races, which sounds absolutely insane for that card. But where are you going to be going on doubling down this week?
Kevin Kilroy comes back. He almost broke the record for the daily double record. We had $180 if we just listened to ourselves. And I singled Hoosier Philly. So I messaged him today and I said, hey, will you come back on my show and keep me from picking Hoosier Philly in the Fairground Oaks? And that was the race where Pretty Mischievous, and he went with Miracle. I said, well, if you're going to take Miracle, you should take Pretty Mischievous as well. We both had Angel of Empire in that next race and pop $180. And I've been thinking about it ever since, as you can tell. So Kevin's going to come back. Kevin Kilroy, that's Trust Your Luck on Twitter. It's a small field. Only 5 horses signed up for the Fairground Oaks, which I was a little surprised by. But you do have Pretty Mischievous and the Alleys look again with Hoosier Philly dropping in there as well. So it'll be interesting to see what he says about Hoosier Philly. You have to remember Hoosier Philly was first off the bench as a 3-year-old, maybe the second time now. We'll see a little bit more, but we'll save that for doubling down. Please like and subscribe, and we will catch you this week.